Hello, class. We're going to take just a moment to look at some very important key elements to your APA methodology section of your experimental proposal. So, for your experimental proposal, you will have a method section, which is your methodology section. And in this section, you want to make sure that what you're writing is going to be concise, precise, and logical at all times. Now, you also want to describe in your method section a very detailed encounter of what it is that you are studying and how you plan to conduct the study. So, in the proposal, you are going to tell the audience um, what again you're studying. So, reminding them what your research question is all about. And then you're going to talk about all of the elements of your experiment and how you're going to conduct these elements. What are you going to use to conduct these elements? How are you going to collect your data? Are you going to use assessment tools? In this particular proposal, you are focused on an experiment. So you want to discuss and make sure that you discuss different types of treatment conditions, which means that you're going to have a group or maybe two groups that will be involved in the experimental group, which is the group that's going to actually get the experiment. And then you're also going to talk about the control group, which that condition will be like, say, a placebo environment. So you want to be very specific about those different treatment conditions in the experimental group versus the control group, and talk about your participants, the apparatus that you're going to use, or how you're going to collect your data, measure the variables um, in its full detail. Okay, so all of that should be um, included in this methodology section. Insufficient details leaves the reader with questions. Too much details burdens the reader with relevant information. So you want to prepare to provide relevant information, important information, and not be too vague about how you're going to conduct your study. So in the method section, typically this is going to consist of these three main parts. So you're going to have these three main parts in the paper, and I'm going to show you a few examples here with this presentation. So in your method section, you should have the participants area section. You should have an apparatus or the materials or materials that you're going to use. So we call that the apparatus. That's two. And then three, the procedures of how you're going to utilize the apparatus with those participants. So you can choose to add subsections and allow those to be defined, which is going to be very important for you to do. So let's start off first with your participants subsection. So this one is going to be called participants. All right. So for the participant subsection, which is the first section, it's going to tell the reader the minimum three pieces of your research, which is going to be who will be a part of your study. So if I want to say African American students at an HBCU, um, which would then tell me about the population that was used, and maybe how old they were, um, their classification, their the time spent at the university, whatever it is that applies to the actual research um, or the variables is what you're going to make sure that you go in full detail about. And then also talk about any restrictions in nature of your participant pool. So if I'm only going to have male, African American males, or if I'm only going to have African American females, or if I'm only going to have freshmen, or if I'm going to have freshmen to sophomores, freshmen to seniors. So whatever the criteria is for the participants, I want to make sure that I fully discuss that. I want to also talk about how many participants will I have, the total number, if they're assigned to the experimental condition or if they're assigned to the control condition. What does that look like, etc. So you see these different elements that should be listed here from 1 to 5 there. And if it is applicable for you to add within your methodology section underneath your subsection, which would be participants, then make sure you include that information. Here is an example of what that may look like. Now, again, you're going to subhead it with participants, um, but you can kind of see like a brief setup of this. So let's look at a quick, like, although it's going to be far more broad than this, but this is a quick start of what the participant subsection will look like. So you see here where it says 27 students from the University of Calgary um, used 12 women and 15 men, ranging from the age of 17 to 43 years old, and they voluntarily participated in the research. We may say what the research, what type of research it is, which is the research design. So in this case, of course, it's going to be an experiment. And there were 9 participants that were randomly assigned to each of the 3 probe type conditions. So in this one, conditions were provided. And it also talks about that these participants all received the informed consent, signed it and agreed, and then you're going to move on to the next part. So a few more examples are listed here, and you can take a moment to kind of look through those and what that actually looks like. I'll give you just a second to do that. You have 4 different examples here. But let's scroll down just a bit. I mean, you can pause this if you need to, so you can read through. But let's just look at this very last one, which says we recruited 29 subjects. Those of the 29, we had 17 males, 12 females from an introductory psychology class, um, or from 2 introductory psychology classes. They were given a choice of extra course credit. Um, it talks about how the groups will be categorized with the Pettigrew's category, with scale on the first day of class, and scored among the bottom 10% for their sex in respective classes, and then talks about what the final analysis of the 20 subjects with fewer missed responses look like and how they were used. So, however it is applicable to discuss the participants, just make sure you do so in detail so that your audience understands who you are studying, what you are studying, and then how you are going to implement those those procedures. So let's go to now the type of materials used. So this is our apparatus or our material section. So the apparatus is going to tell us the second subsection of your methodology section. It's going to tell us what equipment, tools, um, any other assessments that you might use to run your experiment and acquire your data. So that's a part of your data collection. Sometimes it's not clear whether something is an apparatus and or a material, so you don't have to worry about losing any type of points of mislabeling apparatus or materials. The main point is that what are the mechanics used within your um, your research, or how you're going to collect your data. Most times, if you use the word apparatus, this is going to describe some type of mechanical device, whereas materials is describing more of a paper, pencil, um, maybe some type of um, clay, that type of thing. So you can kind of keep that in mind, but apparatus or materials kind of work interchangeably when it comes to describing what you're going to use within your paper. Typically, the standard equipment used might be screens, timers, keyboards. Um, that's just to name a few. It could be multiple things that are used depending on what your research is all about and how you plan to collect that data. Um, you could talk about the model of some particular equipment, the supplier name, the location, etc. So whatever that type of apparatus or materials used, you can add that to this section of the paper. So here's a quick example, and you can see how it's used here at the bottom. And that is another thing to keep in mind. Those subheadings will be um, italicized. So just like how it is here. So it'll be participants italicized, then we get down to the next one with materials or apparatus um, italicized. So here's an example of that. A survey was constructed and used that contains 6 simple yes or no questions dealing with honesty, cheating, stealing, and getting caught, right? And then it talks about a Monopoly game board was used for demonstrating the questions. So you kind of see the setup. Here's another one. The social phobia skill was utilized in the study. It was a questionnaire of 15 items um, with the subject, which the subject is asked to put a check mark in the blank. So you're pretty much just specifically stating what the apparatus or materials is or are, and then specifying how that particular material or apparatus um, is set up. What are the indicators? Okay, so here are multiple examples again of those items, and you just want to make sure that you um, are again providing very um, detailed responses for each subsection. So once you understand your apparatus and or materials, then you're going to now talk about exactly how those materials or apparatus will be used to collect your data. So your procedure subsection is the third subsection of your methodology section, and it's going to give a summary of each step that is used to execute the research and execute using those materials and or apparatus. So this particular section again is going to be concise, precise, and logical, and you are going to give as much detail as possible, but it does not have to be overkill with the information. As long as they're able to read and understand what it is that you're doing and how you're going to collect the data, then that should suffice. So you're going to describe the design. You're going to give a summary of the instructions of um, the apparatus. All of this definitely will be placed in your appendix section of your paper, your proposal. You're going to give a description of the specific experimental manipulations, which would be your treatment conditions based on your IV and your DV, and what your IV, um, what your what exposures your participants will engage in as far as the IV is concerned. And then you're going to go into um, what that's going to specifically look like. So here are a few examples of the procedure section. Participants were given a sheet of paper consisting of both humorous and non-humorous sentences. They talk about the time limit of how long it's going to take, and or how much time was provided um, after after the participants read the sentences. They were given a small distractor task, and then they were given 3 minutes. So you're talking about time frames. You're talking about pretty much what the steps are for the procedure section. So what are the procedures that will be included in your study? So again, here's another procedure example to prepare you. Okay. So I just want you all to be clear on what you would be using to do your um, to complete your methodology section. This is actually probably the easiest portion of your paper, and so you can kind of um, do this one relatively easy, if you will. So that is just a quick look at your methodology section where you're going to highlight your participants, your apparatus and or materials, and your procedure section.